Hello, and welcome to today's session number 4 in a series on making homes that work. My name is George Braddock, and I'm the Director of Creative Housing Solutions based out of Eugene, Oregon. And I want to express my appreciation to the New York Office for People with Developmental Disabilities who made these 4 webinars possible. And in particular, I want to thank Lucinda Grant Griffin, who is the Director of the Office of Home and Community Living for the state of New York, for her support on this very important project. Neither the state of New York nor Creative Housing Solutions receive compensation in any way for those materials that are presented or mentioned in this presentation. So this is the 4th session that we've done. Session number 1, we introduced the idea that the environment matters. And it was trying to begin to help people think about the physical environment in a different way. Help them understand that the physical environment is a greater predictor of behavior even than personality. And that in almost all circumstances, it has a tremendous influence in what we do. And the right physical environment can enable you, and the wrong physical environment can disable you. If they turn off all the lights in this room, we're all blind. So you also understand that there are, for all of us, many technologies that support us being able to live successfully. But in looking more deeply at the physical environment, it's just beginning to realize that not only can it promote independence and support people living the kind of lives that they want, it can also create barriers and make it impossible and make it frustrating and create stress for them if it's not the right environment. In the second session, we took a look at environments that were not working. They were broken environments. We looked at things that created tremendous health and safety issues when they were broken, like windows. We looked at things that were inconvenient because they were too hard to clean. And we showed a lot of suggestions that techniques that families could use to solve problems, curtains that could be pulled down and easily put back up, wall surfaces that would put up with the testing of materials, ways of soundproofing. So the broken environment looked at not only problems that are pretty common in environments that aren't working, but also offered a number of solutions, construction assemblies, strategies, and ways of thinking about it. In the third session, we spent a lot of time talking about the caregiver and how important it is to support the activities of the caregiver, because not only is a home a living place, but it's also a workplace. And if you don't take care of people that are providing the services and supports to the individual with disability in that home, and they begin to wear out and break down and get injured, then it's likely that that person is going to end up in a more restrictive setting, may end up having to leave their home, leave their neighborhood, leave their community. So along the way, we want to always be thinking not only about the health and safety and happiness and achieving the dreams and the desires of the person we're supporting, but also paying attention to the fact that someone has to do the work. And how can we reduce that workload on them? How can we help them have more controls in their lives? And then today's session, which is the autism-friendly environment, begins to pull all these things together, and we start thinking about you looking at your own situation. How do you start? How do you make the evaluation? How do ultimately you get to a place where you understand the kind of things that you need based on the background that you've received in relationship to the function of the physical environment, the importance of it, things that can be done to fix it and make it work, so that at the end you end up with an autism-friendly home that not only supports short-term and long-term the person in your life, but also supports you as the caregiver. So that's the goal for today's meeting. There are 4 principles that we've looked at through all 4 of these presentations, and these are the key ways that we think about the physical environment and questions that we ask ourselves as we move forward in the work. And we make a statement that people enter into relationships with physical environments for better or worse. If the environment is working, and a person can live the kind of life they want there, they can feel that they have control, that they feel safe, that they are able to make meaningful choices. These are environments where the relationship is good. But if you're looking at environments where extreme measures have to be made in order to keep the person safe, that the doors have to be locked in particular kinds of ways, or that the bathroom doesn't work at all, that patterns begin to be established where the home isn't working. And what ends up happening is that the choices and the ability for people to move freely and live freely in their environments have to be restricted in order for the home itself to survive, in order for the caregivers to be able to continue to do their work. So we begin to think more about what a relationship is and how the environment can really shift that. And what we want is we want good relationships with the physical space. We help to think about problem behaviors and begin to unwrap what really is oftentimes at the core of a problem behavior. We gave examples of bouncing on the furniture. If a person bounces on the furniture and the furniture gets broken, then you say, well, the problem behavior is that Carl bounced on the furniture. But really, when you begin to unwrap that, it was not so much that Carl bounced on the furniture, which is something that he wanted to do. He needed that vestibular stimulation. It was that the furniture was broken. So that if you go in and you create some furniture that Carl can bounce on and get what he needs and enjoy what he wants to do without being broken, then you really begin to see that the real problem of the behavior wasn't that Carl wanted to bounce on the furniture. It was that the furniture wouldn't put up with being bounced on. And there are some strategies that we've developed and talked about that help unwrap and correct some of those issues. After more than 30 years of experience at doing this work, one of the lessons that we've come away with is you cannot fix a problem behavior in a broken environment. The environment itself, once it begins to deteriorate, creates barriers to changing not only that situation, but moving on to more positive aspects of a person's life. So in all cases, once the environment gets broken, you have got to address that issue first. And then you can move on to supporting a person to have the kind of life that they want and to make that environment work for them in a better way. And finally, if the environment doesn't work, it is not the person's fault. And the example we used is that if a person in a wheelchair approaches a set of stairs, we don't expect that that person is going to go up that set of stairs. We assume that what is needed is an environmental modification so that that person can go to that next level. That person needs a ramp or the person needs an elevator. And we don't blame the person for not being able to get up the stairs. And we make an argument that when you start looking at people with cognitive disabilities, autism spectrum disorder, other kinds of intellectual disabilities, sensory processing issues, that the kinds of physical barriers that exist for them to be able to use their homes in the way that they want, for them to be able to access the community like everyone else, that the kinds of environmental changes that can be made to support that are as profound as creating a ramp for a person using a wheelchair. And the fact that the environment doesn't work for them is no more their fault than the person in the wheelchair can't go up a flight of stairs. So probably the most important thing to think about when you think about what's going to happen in your son or daughter's life moving forward, where are they going to go, what's going to happen with them when you're not around anymore. And this really is a major concern for parents all over the country. And they gather and talk about it all the time, and the incident and frequency of autism has increased tremendously in recent time. Almost 500,000 people now are entering adulthood with a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. And the system and the housing fabric that's available is really not equipped to deal with this new influx of people. And so when you start thinking about, well, where's my son and daughter going to end up? I would suggest that the first thing that you want to talk about is the community and how you create and how you evaluate a community where your son or daughter is likely to be accepted, where there are things for them to do there and places where that diversity is welcome. So the first thing you want to look at when you're thinking about what's a community going to look like that's going to support a person with autism spectrum disorder living in it. And I think that there are ideas that you can see things that allow you to understand that inclusion is incredibly important. And you can see that by the diversity in the neighborhood. As you travel around, you'll see people that are being quite successful in that neighborhood, you see people that are using wheelchairs, you see people that are out on the street walking. You begin to see the diversity of the neighborhood. This particular photograph is Colin, who's a neighbor of mine. And every day Colin comes to our house and delivers a joke and picks up the recycling. And Colin, is well known in the community. He's known at the bagel shop, he's known at the bus station, and that idea that Colin has a place there is well known in the community, and it is a community that supports and accepts that sort of diversity is probably one of the things you most want to look at. So you're really analyzing the DNA of the neighborhood and the community that you live in. So what might an ASD-friendly, autism spectrum disorder-friendly neighborhood look like? What are some of the things that you might see in that neighborhood? You'd see the kind of diversity that we're talking about. You see people of different ages, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different races, different capacities in the community. And you see them present in the community. So you think about sidewalks, you think about buses. Without transportation, people end up very often isolated in their homes. So the need for people to be able to get out and access the resources that are in the community are an incredible part of looking at a neighborhood that is going to be accepting of and really work for your son or daughter on the spectrum. The neighborhood provides opportunity to build social capital. Really what you end up doing, the quality of our lives really are in many ways related to the relationships that we have. And when you're in the neighborhood, oftentimes the stereotypes of people with autism or people with other kinds of disabilities begin to break down when we see each other at the store, when we encounter each other at the McDonald's, when we ride the bus together. So the more often we are in contact with people who are different than ourselves, the more we realize we're all much more the same. And those stereotypes begin to break down and the possibility of friendships emerge. And within that, we're starting to talk about social capital. And the more people that you know, the more places that you're connected, the more people that know you, the more of that social capital you have, and the more likelihood that you're going to have the kind of life that you want and be able to live successfully in community. And a community that works, a neighborhood that works, it has to have meaningful things to do. It's not about just sitting around your house. It's really, you can make the homework, and we know that. And we've talked a lot about that in these sessions. It's like we really understand the mechanics of making the homework, but the challenge continues to be, how do you truly include and truly be part of the community? And in order for that to happen, there has to be meaningful things for you to do, meaningful things for you to participate in. So in thinking about the first step is, what's the community you're living in? And does this neighborhood work for you? Did Anna grow up here? So if Anna grew up in the neighborhood and has established relationships, has friends, went to school there, moving her away from that neighborhood oftentimes leaves this tremendous void. So when you step back and think about into the future, adult with autism spectrum disorder, and you start wondering whether does it make sense for us to remain in the neighborhood, if your neighborhood has the kind of qualities that we're talking about and you've evaluated in that way, then it may be best to make the decision to stay there, possibly to remodel your house so that it works moving forward. Resist the urge to congregate. And this, one of the things that I'm experiencing all over the country in my work is families at a certain point begin to realize that they can't continue to provide the kind of care that they provided for their sons and daughters forever. And I sometimes work with families, Anne in particular, who we've worked with for more than 20 years. Well, 20 years ago, mom and dad really thought they could just keep doing it, and because they had to keep doing it. But as time goes on, we all realize that things change, and that people's lives change, and their needs change, and their lifestyles change. At a certain point, you just can't keep doing it, that you have to have some help. But that doesn't mean that the family necessarily has to disintegrate or fall apart. So what ends up happening with these families is, because they've had this experience of autism spectrum disorder together, they've had the experience in the preschool situation, they've had the experience through high school very often, through that incredibly difficult transition from high school to adult life. So they've built these friendships, And these friendships have come around the fact that their children share a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. And so it's not so hard a leap to think that these parents would get together and say, well, doesn't it make sense for our kids to live together? Doesn't it make sense for us to make a neighborhood? Doesn't it make sense for us to build places that work, physical environments that make sense for our kids? And then they'll be safer there. We can make sure that there are people there that watch them. We can do gated communities. Well, I think that there's good reason why people think that that makes sense. And there are many places around the country where they've moved forward with exactly this formula. But I would argue that it does two things. One, it makes an assumption that because a person has a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, they necessarily only want to live with other persons with autism spectrum disorder. I mean, so what is it about that diagnosis that leads you to the second conclusion? And then that they believe that because they are together and that people can watch them, that they'll be safer. But oftentimes what we find in the long run is that placing vulnerable people together only increases their vulnerability. That really you're safest when you're in the neighborhood. You're safest when you're known. You're safest when you're seen on the street. You're safest because people know when Colin comes in for a bagel. I know when somebody's in our neighborhood that doesn't belong there. That's really where safety is. It's within the community. And very often these projects will start out quite strongly when the parents are still around to watch them happen. But as the parents die and move on, then it starts to become more of an agency. And what ends up happening is the survival of that agency, that organization, begins to take priority over the lives and the person-centered development of the individuals that are living there. So resist that urge to gather in, to congregate, because somehow that makes sense and that there's safety supposedly in those numbers. So we're going to begin talking about what are 6 steps. There's a sort of a systematic approach to looking at your own environmental situation, looking at your own home, looking at the individual from a person-centered perspective that helps you make some decisions about what kind of environment makes sense and how to make that work moving forward. So the very first step is take a look at, let's define the problem. What are the issues that we're facing every day that are the most challenging to us? And if in fact you need to maintain line of sight and be within hearing distance at almost all times in order for your son or daughter to be safe, that's the single greatest challenge. And if you remember, it's also one of the 3 indicators that results in out-of-home placement. So that idea that parents or caregivers can be eternally vigilant is really, it's at the end of the day, it's really not possible. And so they end up making decisions and doing things and to restrict that person's movement in order for them to remain safe. So then you want to take a look at the home itself and you want to ask yourself a question: what's not working in this home? What's broken in the home? And if it can be things like, because Carl will get out the window at night, I lock the window, and then Carl gets the window open. And I put screens on the window, and Carl figures out a way to get the screens off the windows. And then ultimately, in frustration, because Carl keeps getting out the window and heading down the street, I might do something like screw a metal screen over the window. I might put a lock on Carl's door, or put a lock on his sister's door so that Carl can't get into her room. Now, are parents doing this because they're bad? No. They're doing this because they've sort of run out of choices, or think they've run out of choices. And they have such a desire to make sure that their kids are safe, and they know they can't stay up 24 hours a day to do it, that they do things like this. But these can be really unsafe things. If there's a fire in the house, suddenly you can't egress out the window. You have to go looking for the key to be able to open the door in an emergency situation so someone can get out. So when you look around the house and you see that the windows are broken, or that you search your yard and you find that there are poisonous plants in the yard, you identify those problems and they start to become part of that list of things that isn't working about the house that you see needs to be corrected. And ultimately, they'll end up as part of an action plan as we move forward. Doors are often another thing that doesn't work in the house. My daughter, when she got upset, she loved to slam the doors. So all the doors in my house for a while were broken. So problem doors, issues around toileting, issues in the bathroom, broken windows. These again are really common situations in houses and environments that aren't working for people. And you see it, usually when I really begin to see these situations is when the teenage years happen. Most of the time, when I'm called to support a family and to come in and take a look at the physical space, it's because the situation has deteriorated fairly significantly. And sometimes what you see is, the manifestations of some of the characteristics of people with autism spectrum disorder, but other times what I see is just a teenager that has a little bit more difficulty managing their emotions, and that they're acting out in some ways and slamming the doors just like my daughter did, or testing the strength of materials in the building. So sometimes I say, well, actually, he's really acting more like a teenager. He may have autism, but this behavior here is what I see a lot of places with just teenagers. So you're continuing to sort of make this list of what's not working in the house. And then we'll be able to go back as part of our action plan and think about some of the solutions that may make sense. It has to look at really basic things. Are the smoke detectors working? Is there a CO2 detector in the house? Are they broken? Have they been damaged? That little light that blinks, there are some folks that just can't put up with that little light that blinks. And you'll put the smoke detector up and down it will come. And so pretty soon you get frustrated with it, and you just take it out. Or it's damaged to the point that it doesn't work at all. Or, will they mess with the electrical outlets? Plugging things in and out, sort of fascinated with that. And the electrical outlet gets broken and damaged, and the cover plate is loose, and there's loose wiring behind it. How do you manage to control the toxins and the poisons and the soaps and the detergents that are in everybody's house? And have you figured out a good way to secure those things and to make them safe? And scald prevention. It seems like a pretty simple thing. None of us are likely to get in the shower and turn on only hot water, or get in the tub when the tub is full of hot water, but it happens. So, looking at those fundamental, basic home safety requirements should be part of the analysis of the house. And a lot of older homes, these things just fall apart due to lack of maintenance, or they're older and scald prevention doesn't exist on the older shower valves. So this is really kind of a careful what's happening, what's working, what's not working, assessment that you're doing, and it becomes part of the action plan moving forward. You want to really, in every way possible, involve the individual. And many times I've had opportunities to work with people that were leaving institutional settings. And I would go to meet with Patty, and staff would say, well, Patty's not really going to be able to communicate with you. She's not verbal. It's going to be really difficult for you to be able to get much information from Patty. Well, it's just, if what you're talking about is just having a conversation, they could be right. But Patty has really strong feelings about a lot of things. And so it becomes really is important to present choices in a way that Patty can make them, and then be aware of the consistency of those choices. So we would talk about colors. People have very strong preferences of colors. And we just recently painted Colin's room, and we were all convinced that Colin loved blue. Because every time it was a choice for Colin, he would pick the blue shirt, or he would pick the blue hat, or he would pick the blue blanket. So we were just absolutely confident that when it came time to pick the color for his bedroom, he was going to pick blue. So we brought out a series of color swaths, and in this color swaths were tones of blue moving to greens, and he picked sage. And what you do is, if you give 20 color patterns to a person, you're not going to get the answer. They're overwhelmed. So it's like 2. And do they consistently pick one over the other? And when we work with Patty and talking about what her bedroom needed to look like, she would again and again pick the same picture, with a bed in a certain place, with a window near the bed, over and over and over again, no matter how many times it was presented to her. So as part of the person-centered planning strategy also requires you to think sometimes a little outside of the box and how you're going to get that information, how you're going to present the question. And then think about, what is it that makes a person happy? And what is it that allows a person to be able to manage emotions, manage overstimulation? Temple Grandin, who has incredible capacity to be able to articulate some of the experiences she has as an autistic person. And she talked about, as a young person, the importance of being able to get into what's called a Kansas City squeezer, which was a chute that would help hold animals to do veterinary work on it. But for her, it was that pressure that would help her sort of reintegrate. For Anna, it's really all about water. And many of the folks that we work with have this incredible fascination with water. It can calm them. It's something that they can control. There's a lot of activity going on there. And so for Anna, who begins to decompensate when things start going wrong in her world, for her to be able to get access to and play with that water and be with it safely suddenly shifts the whole conversation. But it takes work, and you have to also have an interest in identifying what brings joy to people, and that should be as important as what keeps them safe. It should be right up there with that same idea. Where is joy for a person, and then do what we can environmentally to make it work. And so thinking about ways of asking that question and then satisfying it. And these are all examples of individuals that, through person-centered planning and understanding their patterns of life and what made them happy, these are the kinds of modifications that happen in their homes where they can have full lives. So we've, over the years, 30 years doing this work, we have found that there are 6 common environmental modifications that we make again and again. We call them the 6 most common modifications for autism spectrum disorder housing. So the very first one is to think about, what would an autism-friendly home look like? What would some of the qualities of that home be? So we would, you can really easily, as we just have identified, you go through and you eliminate those obvious hazards. You take care of the smoke detector that's broken, or the fact that there's no scald prevention on the hot water heater. But you look at other things as well in the house. And so it's part of that sort of step 1. We're taking a look at what's going on. We're taking a look at what's not working. You look at what are the personal risks involved. So you can sort of see that it's really a very sort of systematic approach to thinking about what is going to make an environment work and make sense. It needs to be a place that's easily cleaned. It needs to be a place that's durable. It needs to be a place that anticipates that people are likely to use it in unconventional ways. So you start thinking about making a space that meets those requirements, and you need to kind of think a little bit out the box. One of the lessons that we learned very early on is that if you take a register and put it in the floor, it's this dark spot in the floor where things go down there. Oftentimes people with autism spectrum disorder have a difficulty understanding when things are over, when things are finished. But certain patterns make it easy to understand. They know that when it goes in the toilet, it's finished, that it's done. So quite often we'll see toileting behaviors that are really about trying to finish an activity. And they know that flushing the toilet, that's definitely going to finish that activity. And what goes down? Black holes in floors. Tennis shoes, dust, dirt, urine, lots of things. So, don't create spaces. It's like looking back at what's going on environmentally that someone might not use them in a conventional way. So looking at some of the characteristics of an autism-friendly home, I think one of the most important things and one of the achievements that we really strive for is when people come into the home and they say, I could live here. This doesn't look weird. And that is as great a compliment as we can get, because very often the physical environment has to put up with extreme unconventional use, and yet still come off looking like a nice place, still looking not like a weird place. So some of the examples that we're showing here, some of these photographs, this is a little sitting room in Ronnie's house, and these are all tempered glass windows. These are breakaway curtains. This table is reinforced and bolted to the wall and the floor. This is a virtually bulletproof carpet that is non-staining, that has a antibacterial backing and surface on it. This is a hardwood wainscot, a fiberglass reinforced wall over plywood. So literally, with anything short of a claw hammer, it would be very difficult to do any damage to that room. Ronnie is a person who significantly tests the strength of materials, and when we went through his house, almost every window in the house was broken. There were holes in every single wall in the house, and if Ronnie got into the bathroom without his dad hanging onto his elbow, the toilet came off the wall and the window got broken out. So you can understand somebody who's really testing the strength of materials. In this particular situation, there was issues of extreme incontinence and things that got thrown, a lot of tossing around, and yet the surfaces had to be cleaned several times a day and sanitized several times a day. But when you went there and looked at it, it really looked nice. Didn't look much different than your house. So the Connecto flooring, a CoreGuard reinforced vinyl material as wainscoting, special sealing at the baseboard, and fiberglass and plastic outlet covers. So literally you could throw 5 gallons of water on that floor and on that wall and mop it up and no damage would be done. And then furnishings that put up with significant spilling and endless hard use. Really looks nice. It doesn't look much different than a breakfast nook in anyone's home. So, and when you think about the autism-friendly home, not only does it have to meet this series of particular requirements, but it doesn't mean it has to look bad. So this is a model of what we think is one of the sort of ideal opportunities that we had to create an autism-friendly home for an individual. This is Colin's house. And it meets many of the criteria that we're going to talk about throughout the rest of this presentation. But probably the most important point that I want to make in looking at this design is that it's about flexibility. It's about flexibility of living situations. So in the modern world, we're beginning to see really significant changes in things. I mean, just recently, you start to realize that the new urbanization, that downtowns, that city centers, they're reemerging. And they're becoming the most popular places. Cities like Portland and Brooklyn, New York, are busting at the seams with people wanting to move there and wanting to live there. Well, why? What is it about that? Well, it's kind of reconnecting to community that once upon a time people thought really success was suburbs and your own house, and your own lawn with a white picket fence. But people have reevaluated that. And they're realizing that there's more richness, that there's more to be said about living in places where the community is walkable, where people know each other, where there is more diversity, so that you can become part of that trend. And you know what? Family is changing. The demographic of family isn't the same as it used to be. There are almost 30% of families today in America have someone outside of the family living there. Multi-generational families, grandparents. Two moms might get together and rent a place to raise their children because it's more affordable to them to be able to split the rents. So the whole configuration of what is family and how does it work is changed. But the fabric that we continue to build, the houses that we continue to build, the apartments that we make, the duplexes that we put on the ground, they're so stuck in this idea that, it's mom and dad and a master bedroom, and it has this kind of quality to it. So as you begin to think about creating this tremendous need, actually, to create housing fabric that works for people, it needs to be developed. And it needs to be part of a larger public policy question of putting that on the ground. And rather than thinking we're outside of the box, it's really, we're sort of joining in with a trend that suggests that there are many types of possible configurations. And so how can you make homes that support that? And so in this case, there's a suite of rooms that really made sense for Colin and how Colin lived his life. So he had his own sitting room, bedroom, bath situation, and laundry, and capacity to separate this wing of the house Early on, he's been in this house for 13 years, and there's been a number of changes in terms of roommates and other circumstances, but it had the capacity to act like a duplex. It had the capacity to have a caregiver that might stay overnight. And what you really see is that it's a house with just a little bit of changes could be a successful kind of multi-family living circumstance under the one roof. So we're kind of pushing the envelope of what is multifamily living. And this is the kind of fabric that I think we're going to see a need, we'll already see a need for, and people that are thinking about long-term what's going to happen with them and their children may well think about this kind of opportunity. So in many of the projects that we're working on now, moms and dads that have been in lifelong relationships with their children with disability are moving to the garages, and garages are being converted. So the ADU, the auxiliary dwelling unit, is becoming an increasingly common and is an extremely useful thing, because family can still remain connected and attached, but you've really got that little bit of separation. It's amazing how much difference 5 feet of separation will make in terms of, this is really my space, and I'm not living with my mom and dad anymore. This is really my house. And all over the country, you see municipalities encouraging that, because rather than continuing urban sprawl, they really do want to see more density. And we can be, again, part of that trend, and the ADU is a very, very workable kind of opportunity. And if at a certain point moms and dads move on, then it's an apartment for a caregiver, or whatever other kind of possible circumstance might make sense within that situation. I think the most important thing is, as we start thinking about our action plan, that we want to create environments that are rich and that they remain interesting over time, and that people can continue to discover things about them and find them interesting in the long run. And if that happens, what you're really trying to do is you're trying to create a situation where there's more safety, and as people feel safer, they're more likely to explore. And you want to create things that can be discovered. So this idea of, we talk about the flexibility in room arrangement, flexibility in use of the house, really promotes this idea of a long-term environment that's going to work for you as you change physically. And we know that physical environments that work long-term work at reducing stress. So anytime you can sort of bring the stress level in an environment down for the individual or for the caregiver, the entire situation changes. We get access to other parts of our brain. We're able to react to situations differently. So when any time I can go in and do a thing that makes the situation a little less stressful, everybody is improved. And everybody's safer when that happens. What if you rent? It's one thing to talk about you own the home and you can go in and you can make a lot of changes to the home, and it's sort of your choice to do that. But what if you're in a rental situation and you're encountering some of the kinds of things that don't work in the house? What are some ideas that you can work on? A number of years ago, we were contacted by a family who lived in Section 8 housing, and the young son, there was a mom and her daughter and son lived in this housing, and the son would get stressed, and when he would sometimes lose control, and he would slam the doors, break the doors, he would make holes in the wall. And even though their program supported doing those repairs, so they would pay the housing authority to come out and patch the wall and repaint the wall, eventually the housing authority evicted them from the house. And they said, even though you're paying us to make the repairs, this isn't working for us. We don't have the time to be coming out here and doing this. You're not living the way you need to live. You're breaking the rules, so you've got to move. And we were contacted to get involved in the situation. And we learned a lot of things about what was causing the stress. And then we were able to identify, so when he was banging on the walls, when he was putting his head through, where was that happening? And what were the circumstances? And we discovered that his sister would go in the bathroom and lock him out of the bathroom and not let him in the bathroom. And he'd get angry. And so where do you think the walls were that he was breaking? Well, they were there right alongside of the bathroom where his sister wouldn't let him in the bathroom. Or when he had to have a timeout and his mom would send him to his bedroom, what are the walls you imagine he broke in his bedroom? There were holes in the walls around his bed. And there were holes in the walls at the exit doors. But we noticed that there were never any holes in the walls where anything was hanging on the walls. So he would never move a picture or put something out of the way to make a hole in the wall. And we asked him, why did he make holes in the walls? Is that something he wanted to do? Did he want to do that? And he'd say no. He said, I would just get so upset, and then the next thing I know, I had this hole in the wall. So we were able to go in and very specifically identify those areas where the problem was, and then created a very affordable panel that could go on what's called a little French clip. So you mount these little clips to the wall and slip those in place. And so you had this panel of protection at all those locations where he targeted the walls. And we changed the door into the bathroom, added some different hinges to it, and put a fiberglass door on it in a different frame. So it didn't matter that he slammed the door. He slammed the door all day long, and he couldn't hurt the fiberglass door or break the frame. And he was able to remain in his home. So it was about finding some solutions, some practical solutions that were economical that could happen in a rental home. So the housing authority had to approve of these changes, and what we were able to argue is that when they were no longer necessary, we could take the panels off the wall and patch a couple of holes, and the door looked the same as any other door in the house. That actually was a better door, and we could move on. So one of the second principles, most common modification we make, we call the connected home. And this is the idea of knowing what's going on, being able to be sure that a person is safe, saving steps, reducing workload. So back when we first started talking about this, one of the most common wears and tears on family is this idea that they have to be within visual connection or earshot or physically near the person that they're supporting in order to keep them safe. So how can you manage to do that in other ways? Well, one thing you can do is you can have confidence that when they're in certain areas of the house that they are safe and you don't have to worry about them. You can make holes from kitchens into living rooms and dining rooms that enable you to be at your work and take a look at what's happening. You can add a window so that you can see what's going on with Anna. So there's ways of connecting the house visually. And then there are now much more modern and sophisticated ways of connecting a house technologically. So not so many years ago, cameras were sort of becoming the ubiquitous thing, and I would go into projects and there'd be cameras every place. And I always ask myself the question, what is it I need to know from the camera? And is there another way to know it that isn't so invasive? Because I'm really certain that I don't want a camera in my house. I don't mind a camera outside or a camera in the yard, but I don't want a camera in my living room or in my kitchen. So what is it I need to know, and is there some technology that helps me do that? And smartphone technology is just quite remarkable in how it's helped move those things forward. So we have some new tools, but there's also just old tools. And you see in this picture, simply cutting a window into the dining room, between the dining room and kitchen, that allowed a view to the outside, meant that when Anna was in the backyard, Mom could feel safe and secure because she could just take a peek out the window and know everything was all right. So it didn't take anything very sophisticated. It just took a different way of thinking about how can you be connected, and making some holes in walls that oftentimes we don't think about because we think that wall is so hard and fixed that we can't change it. So these are some other possible solutions to that kind of connection. We've found a remarkable thing in the many years that we've done this work about aquariums. And aquariums, for some reason, many of the folks that we work with are quite certain that they can see you through the aquarium, but that you can't see them. And so it oftentimes works as this kind of interesting transparency, put them in sitting rooms, and it's this again, it has something about me from the perspective of responsibility for taking care and making sure that you're safe, but also from the person's perspective, being able to make some choices. Colin always wants to know everything that's going on in the house. That doesn't mean that he necessarily wants to participate in it, but he doesn't want things going down that he doesn't know about. And so these are some different ways of making those kinds of connections. And sometimes in order to provide really good care and really timely care and to help support someone, you need a place, we call it the catbird seat. You need a place in the house where you can really observe activity. And we worked with an individual who had smearing behavior, and this would happen repeatedly. So we can try to set up some positions where you could keep an eye on the person and figure out what the timing was in order to kind of create a program and a strategy for helping deal with this issue. And when we got it just right, the difference between where the desk sat and the kind of position it allowed us to observe what was going on related to time, they were actually able to intervene at the appropriate times and ultimately shift that behavior. So knowledge about what's happening, but that knowledge goes both ways. So in Kyle's situation, Kyle is totally on top of what's going on in the house. And he sits at the kitchen window all the time and pays attention to that. And yet he's very defensive about people coming into his space. So he is connected to the activity of the house when he wants to be, but feels very secure in his own space. And the reverse is true. Moms and dads can understand that Kyle is safe in his space without necessarily having to invade it. Again, this idea of modern technology that is economical, it's simple, iPhone connected, really makes it possible for you to really be aware of what's going on, get the kind of information you need. If the window opens a little bit in the bedroom, that's fine. Everybody should be able to open their window a little bit for ventilation. If the window opens all the way at 3 o'clock in the morning, then that's something I might want to know about. And I can have sensors that would alert me on my phone and react if that's a situation. Water sensors that tell me when the tub is overflowing. So simple technologies that make it easier for you to live in the house, make it safer, but are less invasive and less restrictive. So always the idea is to maximize the ability for people to make choices for themselves, to do the things that they want to do, provided that it can be done safely, that they don't hurt themselves, that they don't hurt others, or that they don't damage the building. So probably the most common problem that we encounter in our work has to do with bathrooms. And almost every project that we're involved in, bathrooms fit into the mix. And if you think about the stresses that are associated with toileting and with the bathroom, it's not hard to understand that. When you go along in the normal sequence of things, of course it's all about diapers and changing diapers, and then at a certain point we're potty training and we're moving forward with that, and that goes on for a while, and then you have this sort of transition time. But eventually, toilet use becomes standard operating procedure, and it's sort of taken care of. But by the time a child is 7 or 8 or 9, and they're still not using the toilet, then it becomes an increasingly big issue. And as it becomes an increasingly big issue for the caregiver, just think of the amount of pressure and the amount of stress that they begin to put on the individual to use the bathroom right. Well, back to that idea of you don't necessarily expect the person in the wheelchair to go up the flight of stairs. And sometimes you can look at a situation and say, actually Anna can't use that toilet. In the same way that that man could not go up that flight of stairs. Because for Anna to integrate all of the situations that she encountered, her tactile sensitivity, the claustrophobicness of the situation, the coldness of the toilet, the confined space, it was impossible. I mean, what's requirement 1 to use the toilet? Requirement 1 is relax. There was like no relaxing happening for Anna. But that mean it could never happen? No, but it meant that each one of those issues had to be recognized and addressed in the design of a bathroom that worked for her. And in many ways, no different than we would address the barriers to a person using a wheelchair to try to get up a flight of stairs. But there are certain basics about bathrooms that we've learned, and they include this list of things, that you want to have adequate space, you want to think about safety. We know we've addressed things about scald prevention. It'd be wonderful if we can have operable windows in the bathroom, Used to be code, but over time they did so many apartment buildings with bathrooms in the middle that many of them don't have it anymore, but you want great ventilation and no openings in the floor. You want a bathroom that's easy to take care of and that makes sense. Don't do one without one of these. If people say, you know, you're coming into this project and you only get to do one thing, George, and once addressing health and safety of, you know, windows that are getting broken and people are getting cut or people are locked in their rooms, but saving those, the first thing I say is put a floor drain in your bathroom. Put a floor drain in your bathroom. It reduces the amount of stress, so suddenly it doesn't matter that water gets splashed out of the tub. It doesn't matter that the shower head gets turned the wrong way. It doesn't matter that Kyle loves to play porpoise in the tub and water splashes all over the place. Those things don't matter anymore because the water comes out of the tub, goes down the floor drain. And it just reduces a tremendous amount of stress. If the tub overflows, it goes down the drain. And if you think about every commercial bathroom that you go in, there's a floor drain in the bathroom. But you go in every residential setting and there's no floor drain in the residential setting. And is that because residential toilets never overflow? Well, I don't think that's the case. It's just that it doesn't really provide for, you know, the eventuality in a way and doesn't design for it. But floor drains are really an important element in any essential bathroom. Responding to what an individual's needs are in the bathroom, they can often create situations where, because routines are well established in bathrooms, it allows other sorts of activities to happen there that lower a lot of stress. So, you know, thinking about, you know, if Colin is unsteady on his feet, something as simple as having a place for him to sit down while you shave him, or having the schedule there that allows and supports him to use the toilet in a way that makes sense for him. And oftentimes you'll see that you may need to add elements early on that can be eliminated later. I mean, what people need today is one thing, but as capacity is developed, as they become more experienced, as they feel that they have more control, those things can go away. And they begin to use the bathroom in a way that satisfies them, in a way that makes sense for them, and in a way that works. We love in-the-wall toilet tanks. Again, after 30 years of doing this and nearly 1,500 projects, toilets are a consistent and persistent problem. The tank outside the wall is difficult. It wants to sweat. The mechanics are there. It has this lid on it. It's difficult to clean it. It's sometimes hard to support somebody getting on and off of it. Who wants to get down on their hands and knees and clean around the toilet bowl? So by doing something as simple as putting the toilet tank inside of the wall and wall mounting the toilet, you eliminate a lot of those problems. You eliminate a lot of those problems. You don't have the tank sweating anymore. You can still get at it through an access panel if there's any kind of repair that needs to be done. And then depending on the circumstances, all different kinds of ways of flushing it. It can go anywhere from a simple push button, which just pushes a little bit of air through to the actuator and flushes the toilet, to a panel on the wall that you just press the panel. So toileting and toileting issues, you know, come up again and again for all sorts of reasons. But these kinds of modifications, and you know, oftentimes because we come to the project and plumbers haven't done this before, we get a lot of resistance. But once they've actually installed these toilets, they find themselves recommending them in other places. They're the most common toilet in Europe, for example. So just kind of thinking about what are the toileting needs and what are some ways that you can support that. And again, this is a whole lot easier bathroom to take care of. And we're always thinking back to how can we save wear and tear, how can we save steps on the caregiver. So this is making a bathroom a preferred place. And this is Tommy's bathroom. This is actually a project that we've just very recently completed in Chicago. And for Tommy, the access to the bathroom, access actually to the bathing process is critical to him being able to have a life that is less stressful, for him to integrate. When things begin to go wrong for him, when he begins to decompensate, he needs to have a safe place to go where he has a lot of control and he can do the things that he wants, and he has this incredible love for water. This is a bathroom that has endless sort of variations of things that you can do with water. He can be in there as long as he wants. This bathroom is indestructible. It's indestructible. And the subtle thing here is if you take the toilet out of the bathroom, or you separate the toilet in the bathroom, it actually becomes a spa. It's this idea that toileting and bathing are the same thing is really sort of a modern catch. I mean, not so long ago, people really did believe that toilets and toileting needed to be in a separate place. It had its own room, it had a water closet. For many years, it was outside. It's only in recent time, and for the convenience of plumbers, that we've managed to put those things all in the same room. But once you make that shift, it really changes the whole attitude toward a bathroom and how people respond to it and what kind of relationship, back to this idea, people enter into relationships with their physical environments for better or for worse. And Tommy, a very good relationship with this environment. And the separation in this case of the toilet room is pretty subtle, but still it changes the whole rest of the space into this sort of spa type activity area. The walking loop, I think in many ways this may be the biggest contribution that we've made to thinking about physical environments that support people on the spectrum. And it's a very simple idea, which is that being able to move through a series of rooms in a loop, a lot of the old houses, you'd see that loop oftentimes existed. And little kids, that was the thing. They would be spinning around that little loop that went through the kitchen and the dining room and into the hallway and back they go again. But for a person with autism, that big muscle movement is really a big part of how they are in the world. It helps satisfy that issue. It also helps kind of manage their social interaction. I mean, I can kind of come by and see what's going on and keep going on my loop, or I might stop, or I might want to join in. If I have a really bad day, it can help staff stay out of the way. Stay out of the way. The thing that's irritating me, I'm not sure what that might be, but by having a loop, by having a way of getting around, it does a whole bunch of different things in terms of supporting a people, supporting a person, using their home the way they want. So you can see it's as simple as you can use doorways to make the loop happen that's connected, or you have a mass in the middle of the room, a kitchen, or something that you can just move around to create the loop. This is back to what we think is the model ASD home. And you can see a very strong loop here, for Colin through the main living area, along the kitchen, through his sitting room, bedroom, through his bathroom, laundry and utility room, and back out. But then there are other loops that allow him to come through other rooms, go outside, down the porch. So there's a number of different ways that Colin can circumnavigate this house. And each one of those loops allows him to, explore and to discover and to live in a place that is a richer environment. And it's one of the first things that we talked about as we start developing our action plan, is the importance of making those things possible. This idea of places of control and layers of freedom. If people have never experienced much freedom, how is it that they learn to do it appropriately? I mean, magically, I've in many cases have a great deal of work moving people out of institutional settings, and they go from circumstances where there are virtually no choices, or the menu of choices is so small as to be practically non-existent. They're institutionalized and patterned, and they move then into community, and somehow we think that they just know how to make choices, and they just know how to be free in community with no experience along that way. So part of what we need to do, I think, is create these situations where we can be sure that a person's health and safety is maintained, but that we create opportunities for people to practice and to build capacity and to learn and to understand and take, in some cases, the consequences of some of the choices that they make. And so there's some things about the physical environment that can facilitate that. So we're looking at places that are safe and predictable. And you want to start off by saying that really in many ways the house needs to be the most secure spot. But the area of the greatest risk is when you move to the outside and to what might give you access to the public street. So thinking about how you can layer this idea where, I can be informed that you've gone to the porch, but it really isn't until you're at a gate and you're likely to get into a position where you may not have safety awareness and you're putting yourself at risk, that I need to be able to have a positive stop at that location. But in many ways, these layers of control and freedom is about creating options and opportunities for people to engage on their own terms, and when they're ready to do it. So the most secure part being the house, and that's the doors. And this is one of the things that we encounter most frequently. You go into homes, and at first it's pretty easy to stop the 4-year-old or the 5-year-old from going out the front door. It can be as simple as a little slide bolt. And then they get a little older, and the slide bolt can go to the top of the door. And they get a little older, and it can be a bell. But at a certain point, they figured it all out. And they know where the key is to the dead bolt. So then you put on another deadbolt, and then you put on another deadbolt. And we actually went into a house where there were 4 deadbolts, because that meant that Josh had to find all 4 keys. But you'd have to find all 4 keys too in an emergency in order to get out the front door. So, it's just this balance once again. So, parents, families do what they have to do to keep their child safe, but at the same time, they may be presenting and putting them at risk in a way that in the long run is unacceptable. So there are some strategies out there, again, some technologies that are better at creating safety circumstances where electronic strikes are intertied to the electrical panel, to the smoke detectors, to the CO2 detectors, so that door, the first thing would happen would be it would open if any of those fail-safes occurred, and they're key paneled, so you don't have to find keys. I mean, literally, this is the same house, and at a certain point, even that didn't work, so he just took the whole door off the frame. Putting in the right kind of fencing that makes sense, fencing that works. At a certain point, you just have to be sure. There are things that you just have to be sure of as a parent, as a person who's responsible for a person's safety, and if they're not aware, and Noah would get out of the house and go across the street and across a highway to get to the public playground. Mom had to know that there was a way that she could stop Noah from doing that. And there were a number of strategies that we put in place, but ultimately it came down to there had to be a fence at that area that was a positive stop. And fences don't have to be ugly to do this work. They can be block arrangements. This is a non-climb fence design, a very durable fence construction here. This is something we've used a lot, which is sports fence, which is lightweight. You can get it up pretty high. You don't get into code violations, but it gives you that absolute layer of security that you sometimes need. And part of any strategy around creating freedom and layers for people is this notion of predictability and notion of safeness, and back to what is it that people want to do? I mean, what is it that Anna wants to do when she gets out of the house? Or where are places that are safe for her where she can go, and when she's there, I know she's okay. I mean, I know that when she's in the bathroom, that she's not going to hurt that bathroom, that she's not going to hurt herself. I know that when she goes to the backyard to do the thing she most loves to do, which is ride on the swing, that she's in a protected area where she has privacy, and I can check in. So as you begin to identify and create Anna's safe places, the van, what starts to happen is Anna has more control, she has more choices in where she goes and feels safe, and moms and dads can stand down because they can be confident that when Anna has made that choice, that she's okay there, that she's safe there. And it's really creating these spaces that de-stress people, that take that pressure off. And I think that the more we recognize the tremendous impact that those hormones and chemicals have, the cortisols affecting the logical and reasoning parts of our brain, and how environments can either help tone that down or they can agitate that. One of the most common issues for people with autism is audio sensitivity. There's a lot of things you can do around soundproofing that's fairly economical, incredibly more sophisticated things showing up all the time, green glues that actually take sound waves and turn them into heat. So managing sound in both directions, sounds that they make, people that might yell or get loud and get upset, how do you make that so that they can live successfully in a neighborhood? So being aware of and responding to those kinds of environmental issues really is part of the overall action plan, and it's knowing and understanding through person-centered planning what that individual needs, but also understanding that we're part of a bigger community and there's also support that's going on for that individual. So all three of those elements need to be in balance for people to really have successful lives. Making it easy to take care of the house. Tools for good housekeeping. It comes right down to what's the floor finish you pick. What do you put on the wall? If things get thrown, it will allow you to clean that up again and again without damaging the wall. Tile floors. Make it simple to do the cleanup. And it saves time, it takes pressure off the family, it allows equipment not to be broken down all the time. So the tools for good housekeeping are really important. It's the funny thing about clutter. It's like clutter has a way of just growing on itself. So creating spaces that are organized where things can be put away, it makes sense for them to be put away. Oftentimes out of sight is out of mind, being able to close a cupboard door. It's like this whole idea of, make the space calming, make the space simple, make it easy to take care of. And once again, what does it do? It brings down the stress, it brings down the workload, and when that happens, everyone does better in the house. So we kind of have seen our way down this series of steps. We're taking a look at what's the DNA of our neighborhood? Does it make sense to stay here? Let's take a look at our house. Can our house be made to work? Let's look at the person. What is it they want to do? Understand the principles of person-centered planning. Look at the things that we can fix. What are some of the strategies around making the place autism friendly, making the bathroom work, connecting the home. So you've seen this is a pretty structured methodology to move through to a place where we're making an action plan. So when we get all the way through that list, we have to ask ourselves, what's the most important thing? What's the most important thing? And it's going to be different with everybody. It was going to be different with everybody. The first time we started working with Anna, it was really because she was testing the strengths of materials and breaking the windows. So the most important thing there was not having those windows get broken anymore. Or Wilson, or how many times that shows up. Or at Noah's place, the most important thing was that he didn't go across that freeway to get to the playground anymore. So you establish your priorities, and then you're ready to really move forward with an action plan. So we're going to end this part of the session once again by going back to those key points that we started all this with, and it's really more about a way of thinking about the physical environment and thinking about the spaces that I want you to come away from these sessions with, and recognizing that these relationships with physical environments, they happen, and they can be good relationships or bad, depending on how well that environment works for you, how it supports the lifestyle that you want to live, how it provides you with choice. It's just no substitute for understanding that the relationship, and is there also a relationship that can improve or a relationship that can deteriorate depending on how the circumstance is dealt with. That when you unwrap a problem behavior very often, it's really the negative consequences of that is the issue. If Noah needed to bounce on the furniture because he needed that kind of vestibular stimulation, that wasn't the problem. The problem was Noah broke furniture. And if we can put furniture in there that doesn't get broke, then suddenly that whole notion changes. You've unwrapped the problem behavior in a different way. You cannot fix a problem behavior if the environment is broken. You will be stuck always with triaging that situation. You'll be stuck always with the couch with springs sticking out of it. You'll be confronted always with the broken window and the blanket hanging over the window that you have to throw yourself between the window and Wilson so that he doesn't get hurt again. You cannot move forward You cannot improve the relationship of a person in their environment. You cannot give them more ability, choices, and self-determination if the environment is broken around them. And if the environment doesn't work, the most important thing of all is do not blame the person. It is not the person's fault. It's not that man's fault in the wheelchair that he couldn't get up the stairs. And it wasn't Anna's fault that she couldn't use the toilet. It wasn't her fault. So there are 5 very specific structured steps that you can take that will ultimately lead to an action plan and give you a document and some information and some ideas about how to move forward when you sit down to do person-centered planning for an individual, and you want to bring the environment to the table when you do that. And step 1 is identifying the problems that you face every day. Involve the person. This is all about person-centered planning. What's working, what's not working. Think about the caregiver. Look at the 6 most common modifications and pick ones that seem to make sense and apply to you. Make an action plan. Thank you.